Sit there to see. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. Maybe at first a warning, this will be or won't be a typical academic lecture. Instead, I will tell you something about how we work in these two memorials and how we deal with victims. So I use the term euthanasia in the title. I won't use it in the further talk because it's simply highly misleading, especially in English. And instead, I will use the term, the German term Krankenmorde. This means just killing of the sick. And it's in the last couple of years also starts to establish in the English-speaking world to describe these kind of crimes. So don't be surprised if I use the German word Krankenmorde again and again in the following minutes. First of all, I thought I have to give you a little bit of the historical context about the Krankenmorde, because maybe not every one of you is completely aware of this type of crimes. And so I will give a brief overview over these ones, and then also a brief overview about the memorialization of the Krankenmorde in the decades after the Second World War in Germany. And the last part, I will focus on the victims a little bit. First of all, historical context. Although eugenic ideas had spread in many industrialized countries since the second half of the 19th century, nowhere were the measures derived from these ideas implemented as radically as in Nazi Germany. Around 350,000 hereditarily diseased people were sterilized between 1934 and 1945. While other countries at the time also had sterilization laws, these were not applied to the same extent, and the systematic extermination of psychiatric patients in Germany during the Second World War was quite unique. You see first the so-called Euthanasie-Ermächtigung from Hitler from the beginning of the Second World War. And I just translated the content a little bit for you for a better understanding. There's not much text on it. Reichsleiter Buhler and Dr. Brandt are charged with the responsibility of enlarging the authority of certain physicians to be designated by name in such a manner that persons who, according to human judgment, are incurable can, upon a most careful diagnosis of their condition of sickness, be accorded a mercy death. And then the sign of Hitler. This was no law. This was no official statement or anything like that. It was just used legitimation of what was happened or what should happen from now on. And this from this time on, psychiatric patients should be registered in the next couple of months. And then there was established a central office in Berlin in the Tiergartenstraße 4 in Berlin, and that's why it was called later Operation T4, because of the address. There these registrations came there, and there were a couple of doctors who looked over this forms with the patients and decided with a simple red plus, that means the people should be killed, and the blue minus, they could. And the main reason or the main criteria for this selection was if the patient was still able to work in the psychiatric institutions, and if a patient couldn't work anymore, that was, so to say, death sentence. And this started not from the killings. It didn't start from one day to the next. It took a couple of months for the organization, and the decision was to create special facilities where these murders should happen. These were the 6 killing facilities of the T4 operation. You can see also Pirna-Sonnenstein in the middle. And the other ones were Brandenburg, Bernburg, Hadamar, Grafeneck, and Hartheim. Saxony in general was one of the regions in which the idea of racial hygiene had become established since the turn of the century. During the Nazi era, measures such as forced sterilizations were eagerly implemented, and several psychiatric institutions actively participated in the murder of patients. From June 1940 to August 1940, parts of the former Pirna-Sonnenstein psychiatric institution were used as one of the killing facilities of the Operation T4. So this is called these centralized Krankenmorde, this Operation T4. And in that time, in the summer of 1941, there's also a second operation happening in Pirna-Sonnenstein, the so-called Operation of Special Treatment 14F13. This was for mostly sick inmates of the concentration camps. Just as a reminder, the concentration camps at this time didn't have any gas chambers. So the T4 organization was the first one to use gas chambers for killing. And so inmates at the concentration camps who couldn't work anymore or who were sick were brought were deported to the killing facilities of the T4 organization. And 14,751 victims were killed between June 1940 and August 1941 in Pirna. We do know this number or this precise number because of the so-called Hartheim statistic, which was made after the end of the Operation T4, and they summarized this operation, and the 6 killing facilities hide behind these letters on the left, and the letter D is for Pirna-Sonnenstein, You can see the number of 13,720, and then more than 1,000 inmates of the concentration camps are on top. So there's the complete number of nearly 15,000 people who were killed in this short period of time. Overall, 70,000 people were killed during this Operation T4 in these six killing facilities. In Großschweidnitz, patients were killed by overdose, overdosation, and poor care. This Großschweidnitz was part of the so-called decentralized Krankenmorde. In Großschweidnitz, especially, it started nearly right with the beginning of the war. Also during the Operation T4, people were killed there, but it happened in a different way. Pirna-Sonnenstein was just a killing facility. The people were deported to Pirna and killed on the same day. Großschweidnitz was still a normal psychiatric hospital in that time. And the killings weren't that effective as in the Operation T4, of course, but it was much easier to keep them secret. And because the end of the Operation T4 is connected with some kind of protests in the German society against these killings. They tried to keep it secret, but it didn't work out because, for example, the killing facility in Pirna-Sonnenstein was above the inner city of Pirna. You could see the building from the market square, and especially the crematory, the smoke from the crematory was obvious. And so it wasn't possible to keep it secret in long term. And there were some concerns in the German society about these killings. The most famous example is a protest from the Catholic Bishop of Münster, Clemens August von Galen, who did a sermon in August 1941, where he openly spoke about these killings and condemned them. And so, also with the background of the beginning war against the Soviet Union a couple of weeks before, they tried the inner front quiet in that time, and that's why they stopped this Operation T4, but they didn't stop the killing. They continued the killings in a different way. And for example, this has happened in Großschweidnitz, but also Großschweidnitz was a transit institution for Pirna-Sonnenstein. I will show you in the next slide. Großschweidnitz had also a so-called special children's ward from 1943 to the end of the war. These special children's wards were established for the children's euthanasia. So this was another part of the Krankenmorde happening at the same time. About 5,500 people died in Großschweidnitz. Just an explanation for what is a transit institution. You can see on the map, Großschweidnitz is hiding behind the number 4 in red. was an institution where patients from other parts of Germany who were transported to Saxony, who should be killed in Pirna-Sonnenstein, transit institutions first. They were kept for a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks, and then transported to the killing facility. This was just a question of organization and capacity, killing capacity in Pirna. So they brought patients, for example, from Eastern Prussia first to Pirna, first to Großschweidnitz, and then to Pirna-Sonnenstein. On the next slide, you will see a couple of things. The development of mortality and deaths in Großschweidnitz, and in some way this speaks for itself. But you can see these black numbers. That's how many patients were at Großschweidnitz at that time. 800 people was the normal number of inmates there. You can see always a little bit more, but you can see especially 1944 and 45, they are double the number of patients there. You can imagine what that meant in questions of hygiene, of food, and so on. And you can see this red line is the mortality. Of course, in such institutions, deaths happen, but it's a normal mortality. And you can see with the beginning war, it starts to rise, and of course, it becomes more and more with the ongoing war. I will come to the second part. For decades, neither historians nor society as a whole dealt with the Nazi Krankenmorde. This began to change slowly in the 1980s. Groundworking works appeared that explored the killings of disabled and mentally ill people in detail for the first time. And the first attempts to come to terms with these crimes also began at the sites where they were committed. In particular, at the sites of the former killing facilities, where this centralized Operation T4 took place. Public remembrance initiatives were launched to commemorate people with disabilities and mental illnesses who were murdered during the Second World War. And the first thematic exhibitions and memorial sites were established in the Federal Republic of Germany, in the GDR, and in Austria in this decade. The site of the former killing facility in Pirna-Sonnenstein was used for industrial purposes in the GDR. Since 1973, there was only a small, generally phrased memorial plaque at the castle, also on the wrong place, which had commemorated the crimes. Official anti-fascism in the GDR was characterized by an extremely one-sided and instrumental approach to the Nazi past. It emphasized above all the communist victims of Nazi rule while neglecting other victims groups, such as the victims of the Krankenmorde. Shortly before the fall of the Berlin Wall, however, an exhibition by the West Berlin historian on the Operation T4 was shown at the Pirna-Sonnenstein Community Center in 1989. After German reunification, a civil society association was founded in 1991, which from then on dedicated itself to researching the site and commemorating the Krankenmorde. The memorial was opened in the year 2000. You can see here the building, but the memorial is only on the left side. And this is the building where the gas chamber and the crematory was located in the basement in the years 1940 and 41. Since then, the memorial is part of the Saxon Memorial Foundation, which means that it is mainly financed by the state of Saxony, and the memorial researches the event of this period as well as the biographies of perpetrators and victims. One major difference between Pirna and Großschweidnitz is that, unlike Pirna, Großschweidnitz was used continuously as a psychiatric institution after 1945. Today, the site of the former state hospital is home to a modern psychiatric clinic, but otherwise the development in both locations show many similarities. Initially, the hospital staff in Großschweidnitz began to look into the institution's past since the mid-1980s. This led to the creation of a monument on the cemetery of the hospital in 1990. You saw it in the first slide, and you saw it also on the program of the Dresden-Prague talks this year. In 2007, the hospital sold the institution's cemetery and the pathology building located on it. And the municipality of Großschweidnitz acquired the site with the aim of creating a memorial site there. Since 2012, again, a civil society association was working on this task, and in order for the project to succeed, it was crucial to review the almost complete collection of medical records of deceased patients and to create a database of victims. In this process, the association received professional support from the. This work provided knowledge about the murders and their victims that was crucial for financing the realization of the memorial. The former building was renovated and the cemetery restored. Permanent exhibition, you can see the building on the picture, and also a part of the exhibition there was created and opened in May 2023. The Großschweidnitz Memorial is also part of the Saxon Memorial Foundation, and within it forms a professional network with the Pirna-Sonnenstein Memorial. I come to the third part. In the last decades, the function of memorial sites in Germany has changed fundamentally. In most cases, they are no longer places of ritual remembrance, but professional institutions dedicated to commemorating state crimes, scientific documentation and research, museal presentation, and historical education. At the center of these diverse tasks are the victims and their biographies. So one of the memorial site's essential tasks is to lost their lives in these places. This work has not yet been fully completed, especially in Pirna. So there's this strange situation that there's a precise number of victims, but you don't have the number, the name of every victim, for example. Another reason is also that the camouflaged Operation T4. So some of the documents are destroyed or lost. Others were forged to conceal the circumstances of the death from relatives. So there are documents with the wrong date of death, with the wrong cause of death, and also with the wrong place, for example. However, the vast majority of victims are now known by name in Pirna and Großschweidnitz. Beyond simply naming the victims, compiling exemplary biographies is important for the various areas of work carried out by the memorial site. And communicating with the public, biographies generally serve first as a way of illustrating injustice through individual faiths without having to comprehensively describe the complexity of the persecution measures. Secondly, the presentation of life stories make it easier to achieve empathy and understanding for the injustices by the recipient. In short, the biographies of the victims are indispensable for the work of a memorial site. Individual biographies can be found in Pirna and Großschweidnitz in every publication and exhibition, on the websites, and also as a part of the educational projects. For years, there has been a dedicated to the lives of victims of the Krankenmorde, and over 60 booklets have been published to date. The title of this series is Giving Back the Names to the Victims. Yeah. Since there were hardly any survivors of the Krankenmorde and they were largely ignored after the war, we cannot ask the victims whether and how their suffering should be remembered. We can only assume that they would agree to be publicly remembered along with their suffering. Contact with the relatives and representatives of the victim cases. For decades, there were no concerns whatsoever about publishing the names and biographies of large groups of victims, for example, Jews and political opponents. A few years ago, however, this seemed to be more problematic for one group of victims, and that was the victims of the Krankenmorde. Some archives and hospitals where patient records from Nazi era were kept put forward ethical and professional arguments, as well as data protection against publicly naming the victims of the Krankenmorde, especially in analog or digital memorial books. As a result, some of these works were only published with anonymized names, which ran counter to their actual intention, namely to bring the victims back from oblivion. After new archival regulations came into force in 2016 in Germany, it became clear that there was no problem in publishing the full names and life dates of the victims of the Krankenmorde anymore. Nevertheless, the question remains as to how to deal with additional information contained in patient records, which are the most important sources when presenting more comprehensive biographies. This is because, in addition to medical and family data, patient records mainly contain the perpetrator and also sensible data. Despite the legal insecurity in the early 2010s, the Pirna-Sonnenstein Memorial did not use anonymized names in victim biographies. The biographies were part of publications almost from the very beginning. The names were given in full, and although there was usually no contact with the relatives. This practice was used long before the argument of naming was settled. But how to deal with this sensible data in these biographies? It is important to note that the aim is not only to tell the story of the person's life in relation to their illness, but to focus on their general living conditions. Diagnoses are mentioned, but they are placed in quotation marks or being contextualized. The language of the perpetrators is avoided as far as possible, or is also contextualized. Names and further information about siblings and children are not mentioned. This is to ensure that the focus remains on the actual person and that the possible concerns of relatives who might be alive today are not affected. So this is a little bit the result of this strange discussion in the 2010s. Dealing with the victims ultimately also highlights the supra-regional significance of the memorial sites. After all, the victims did not come from Saxony alone. Tens of thousands transferred within the German Reich during the war as part of Operation T4, or later to create room in hospitals in northern and western Germany. Saxony was a destination region for these transports. Many of the killed here came from regions such as Bavaria or the Rhineland, but also from areas that today belong to Poland or the Czech Republic, such as Silesia, East Prussia, and the Sudetenland. After 1945, German victims of National Socialism were understandably not in the center of remembrance in these countries. However, with the disappearance of Germans, the victims of the Krankenmorde in these regions also disappeared. In addition, the files disappeared into archives and hospitals where they remained difficult to access for decades. It is to the credit of the Pirna-Sonnenstein Memorial, especially the director, Boris Böhm, there. Also, we have Michal Simonek here, and many others. And as a person for them in some way now, there's a whole group of people who were working there now for the last 3 decades. And so the credits go to them and not really to me, or not only to me. So it is to the credit of the Pirna-Sonnenstein Memorial that in collaboration with local partners that they were able to convey the history of these victims in Poland and the Czech Republic through exhibitions and publications in the last 20 years, especially just for example. So there were different publications to this in the middle. The important work also from colleague Simonek here to the Sudetenland and also to the so-called protectorate. And the thematic connections and also the geographical proximity of both memorial sites to the Czech Republic offers opportunities for cross-border cooperation in remembrance work, research, and historical education. So this is a small commercial break or invitation for you to not only to visit us, but also to maybe to start a project or something like that. I just have some information here from Großschweidnitz in English. If you want, you can take one of these. At the end, and I will make it very quick. I see. I just wanted to make some examples, because I talked now a lot about victims, and that's why I thought I just wanted to add 2 people with a certain connection to this area here. Anna Grünfeld was born on the 11th of March 1887 as the only child of the merchant Salomon Grünfeld and his wife Ernestine in the town of Kremžier. Please excuse, I won't try to pronounce So I will use the German term. He went to school in his hometown and graduated from it in 1905. He lost his parents very early and was already an orphan by the age of 15. After graduation from school, Anna Grünfeld enrolled at the University of Breslau as a student of philosophy. And as he was largely penniless, he was supported by the Jewish community with a scholarship. From 1907 to 1913, he also studied Jewish theology at the Jewish seminary in Breslau. Immediately afterwards, he was appointed rabbi in Eger and Cheb in western Bohemia and held this position until the end of 1927. During the First World War, Anna Grünfeld was very active in caring for refugees and the wounded. And for a time, he served as a rabbi, field rabbi for the Imperial Austrian Army on the Eastern Front. After the end of the war, he stayed in Cheb and became a loyal citizen of the new Czechoslovakian state, but he also was sympathizing with the Zionist movement. He married Selma Schatzmann in 1921, and 1 year later, their only child, Edith, was born. In 1928, he became a rabbi in the Moravian town Iglau. And after the German occupation of the Sudetenland in 1983 and later the rest of the Czechoslovakian state, he was very concerned about the situation. At the end of March 1939, serious anti-Jewish riot broke out in Iglau, instigated by the German residents and several members of the occupying forces. During the riots, 21 shops and businesses owned by Jews were damaged, and the synagogue was set on fire. Anna Grünfeld lost more than just his workplace as a part of the massive expropriation of Jewish property in the then called Protectorate. The Nazis also expelled the Grünfelds from their apartment in early June 1939. It was therefore a great relief for Anna Grünfeld that his daughter was able to flee abroad before the war began. At the beginning of the Second World War, the German occupiers took hostages in the Protectorate, including prominent figures from Czech public life, such as civil servants, scientists, clerics, and politicians, and among them was Anna Grünfeld. He was arrested by the Gestapo, transferred to the concentration camp in Dachau, and 2 weeks later to Buchenwald. In mid-June 1941, Anna Grünfeld was brought before a medical commission of the Operation 14 and 13, along with numerous other prisoners. And when the SS compiled its first transport to Pirna-Sonnenstein, Anna Grünfeld's name was on the list, and he was deported together with 93 other prisoners to Pirna on the 14th of July 1941, and probably killed on the same day in the gas chamber. His body was burned immediately after the killings, and the urn was returned to the Buchenwald concentration camp. They tried to cover it up, like I said, wrong place of death, wrong date, and of course, wrong cause of death. His wife, Selma, was living at that time here in Prague, and she learned of her husband's death through the Jewish community here. She received an urn from Weimar and buried it in the Saxony Jewish cemetery here in Prague. The second one, a little bit shorter, because the example of Jan Procházka shows the dependence on the patient files as a source. Because he was registered at the Großschweidnitz psychiatric institution as a foreign worker. So he was a forced laborer, and the file consists of just over 20 pages and contains little information about his life before he came to Germany. Hospitalized forced workers were treated even worse than the German patients. Either their working ability could be restored within a very short period of time, or they were quickly killed. The patient file of Jan Procházka gives us just a few information about his life. He was born on the 12th of December 1921 in town in Slovakia. His apprenticeship after his graduation from school, and he obviously didn't stay at one place for a longer time. He lived in Holleschau in 1940, and his last living place before he came to Germany was 1943 in Uhersky. In December, he came to Germany and was working as a foreign worker in the Saxon war industry. And after some time, he attracted negative attention due to his reckless behavior. As he was endangering other workers, he was dismissed and sent to the Großschweidnitz psychiatric hospital. The doctors diagnosed him with epilepsy, and initially he worked at the institution, but his release was not considered. On the 27th of February 1945, he died after suffering an epileptic seizure. And in such cases, it is difficult to assess whether a targeted killing took place or whether the systematically created circumstances led to the death. For example, epileptics were usually given small doses of the sedative, and if patients did not receive this medication, it could trigger frequent seizures. But of course, you can't see this in the patient file. Yeah, and so this is one reason why we consider all patients who died in Großschweidnitz during the Second World War to be victims of the Krankenhaus. Just a short summary I wanted to give you. I would like to say that breaking the anonymity of the victims of the Krankenmorde had to happen on various levels. First, the perpetrators' cover-up measures had to be exposed. Second, research had to be conducted to find out which patients were murdered and where, and so that they could be commemorated appropriately. Third, the victims had to be made known again in their regions of origin. Last but not least, the silence in the families about the victims of the Krankenmorde, which had persisted even decades after the end of the war, had to be broken in some cases by the third or fourth generation. And it is the task of the memorial sites to promote this development. So, thanks a lot.